I want to come back to my initial question about why the interest on the part of the private sector in issues like the work of GCOM, and specifically against the backdrop of allegations. Again, some of it probably unfounded. You will explain that. But against the backdrop of these allegations, that the Private Sector Commission has been silent at particular periods during the history of Guyana and since its formation, and that they are only, to be frank, when if perhaps a specific government is in office, that it develops a liveliness and a willingness to comment and to be.
I will respond to that by saying to you that the Private Sector Commission have always been involved. We have been involved in 1992 when the private sector was being reborn, and I said the private sector did reborn under Desmond Hoyt, and in fact, if you remember, under Desmond Hoyt there was the creeps, people who were banding. There's a lot of private sector people who were banding together for the re-election of Desmond Hoyt. So as the country started to change, the political establishment started to understand that public-private sector relationship was vitally important, not only for financing, but certainly to get involved. And so back then, it happened in 1992, for example. Those who were involved would know that the private sector were lending tremendous amount of support, logistics support to get things done. And my own personal involvement, even though as an Army officer I was involved in other areas, but certainly in 1997 was my first real involvement in working with GCOM in providing logistics support to GCOM. I remember sitting in those days, I think Joe Harmon was in the Elections Commission, and Lowen Field was there as well. And we were basically planning the logistics, looking at how to coordinate the logistics of GCOM across the country. And then in 2001, again, we were very involved. Certainly by the time 2006 came around, and I was then the president of the Chamber of Commerce. And more particularly, I'll tell you, Wesley, when I was a student at the National Defense University doing hemispherical defense and security in Washington, and we started to understand that really every citizen of Guyana, and I think there's an old saying that says only fools don't get involved in the affairs of the state if you live in that state. And so every one of us is obligated to have a say, to contribute to the discussion, and whatever that discussion is, and particularly as citizens, and more particularly as private sector and private sector leaders. And so there's nothing that is off limits. Certainly for me personally, there's nothing, whether it's national security, whether it's elections, whether it's to do with natural disasters. The private sector would always and always have been very much involved in that. And so in 2006, as an example, when we were now moving into those elections, I remember that the PNC started a slogan saying no verification, no elections. And we met with them. We met with the PNC, at the time it was Robert Corbett, Vincent Alexander, and a lot of their senior people. We met with them to find out what exactly they were talking about, because they were talking and the opposition, the government was talking, and nobody seems to be listening to one another. So that's how we got involved, and we said, and they explained that they were talking about a way to verify the list, that they were suspect that maybe the list, there was duplicates on the list and so on. And so in my courses back and forth to Washington, I was in one course after that discussion, and the gentleman was doing a program on biometrics for airport security. So I asked him, how could we use biometrics in elections? I didn't know how they did it. And he said, well, listen, we just finished the program in Jamaica. And maybe if you went and asked them, they'll show you. So I called the Chamber of Commerce in Jamaica, and I asked them to arrange for me to meet with the Elections Commission in Jamaica. And they did. And I flew from Washington to Jamaica. And I met for 3 days with Elections Commission, and they showed me, they walked me through the system, they showed me what they were doing, and I videotaped it. And I brought it back, put it in 3 CDs, and I give Robert Corbin a copy, I give Suraj Bali a copy, and I give Barry Jagvio a copy. And I said to them, we should look at this, and this is from the private sector, we should look at this as a possible option. Shortly after, I know that Dr. Suraj Bali then engaged the Jamaicans. I know he went to Jamaica. Initially, they were talking about using 2 fingerprints. I think we all met together and agreed that we'll use all 10 fingerprints as biometrics. And it cost the government of Guyana $600,000 for the software and for the system and training. And what came up behind that was that we never again wanted to ever have a discussion on the question of the integrity of our National Registrants database. So we wanted to ensure that it was beyond question in the future how we will do it. And so after the 2006 election, they went and did the house-to-house registration as a start to build the foundation of this new National Register of Registrants. So they did a complete house-to-house registration using biometrics, using your photograph on the voters list, on the national database. And then we also made the decision back then that we were going to continue. So they started to register from 14 years old. So every Guyanese from 14 years old was being registered. And with the understanding that the software, the minute you become 18 and you pull on the database to get the voters list, that person will be kicked over to the voters list at age 18. And then because house-to-house registration sometimes miss people like myself, pilots who are never home, miners, loggers who are in the hinterland, Guyanese who are traveling overseas and so on. The concept of continuous registration, like happened throughout the Caribbean, was introduced with the understanding that the National Register of Registrants will be an alive and dynamic database that will be continuously updated and kept alive through the cycles of continuous registration. And it will also be kept clean through continuous cycles of claims and objections as well. So people, there'll be times when you'll check the database, you'll see if your name is in it. If you're not in it, you could register, or you could register your family, and so on. And then the idea is monthly, every once or twice a month, or whatever that figure is, the GPO, who normally deals with the number of deaths in the country, and then GCOM will then extract the dead people after this. And this is the procedure that was in place for the last 10 years. And this was under the custody of Lowenfield as well. So we all knew that this was happening. We have extremely high sense of confidence in that system. So that because we know that every person that was registered on the National Register of Registrants had their 10 fingerprints, they have their photograph, the people are being registered from the age 14, the dead people are coming off because of the information coming from the GPO to the Elections Commission, and continuously the national database is being updated. So we were very, very pleased with that. And the idea is, because GCOM always had to be ready for elections within the provisions of the Constitution, so that any point in time, GCOM could go to that National Register of Registrants, extract the PLE, right? If the elections is called, the preliminary voters list. This is then posted up all over the place, so people could go now and do their claims and objections to check the list to see who's on it, who should not be in it, and so on. And when that is finished, then official list of electors is now finalized, and that becomes the list in which you go to elections with. That official list of electors is what is valid for only 6 months. The National Register of Registrants don't expire. That list from 2008 is the most exacting and scientifically secure database with a tremendous amount of integrity, with your photograph, with your fingerprints, with every 14-year-old in it. And if you didn't register during the continuous cycles, you could catch the next continuous cycle. They were going into the schools and registering our young people. And so we were very, very pleased with that, and we have always been involved. Let me give an example, Wesley. In 2011, when the first time that database was used for elections, again, the PNC, at the end of those elections, said they had some uncomfortability with the SOPs, that they felt that maybe the SOPs that they had was different from the ones that GCOM had. And so the opposition at the time was protesting because they wanted copies of GCOM SOPs. GCOM said, well, the ones that we got and the ones that you have is the same one, so we're not giving you yours. The Private Sector Commission led a delegation down to GCOM in 2011. Into GCOM office, Suraj Bali and all his people in there was there, including Glowingfield, when we made the case that they must find a way to satisfy the demand of the opposition at the time to give them copies of the SOPs. And at that meeting, there was a Canadian consultant that was embedded in GCOM, and he made the suggestion to Dr. Suraj Bali, we don't have to actually give them our own, but what we could do, we could scan all the SOPs, put them on CDs, and distribute them far and wide, which is what happened, you know? So the Private Sector Commission have always been involved in trying to sometimes resolve these impasses that happen, and we would constantly meet with all the political parties. And I would say to you that Robert Corbyn would remember the days that we were there in 2006 with him, when we came down to Congress Place when they had problems with the elections, with the election results taking too long to arrive. So the Private Sector Commission was always involved. We all also are very involved in terms of becoming accredited observers. We field 2,000 observers working in collaboration with the EAB to put local observers almost in every polling station across the country. We work very closely with the Carter Center, with the Commonwealth Secretariat, with the OAS observer teams. So this is not new to the private sector at all. It's just that maybe people were not always following what was happening in Ghana, but the private sector have always been constantly involved at all times.